It was the last shuttle flight in history, and we had already undocked from the space station. You know, when you're near the space station's got a lot of lights, and it's metal, so it reflects the sunlight, and it's very bright, and you can't really see the stars quite as well as you'd like. So when you're in your own orbiting vehicle, separate in the shuttle, you can shut all the lights off and look outside, and it's just incredible. And it was the night before we were coming back, and it's just this very fond memory of the four of us silently looking out the windows, but, you know, all thinking about, you know, hey, this might be the last time we fly in space. And, you know, this is the last time the shuttle's ever going to be in space, and all those things. And it was a pretty incredible moment.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step.
Just let go.
Special episode today. So Carly Shahada from Team Renegades here at the Why Not Now show. She is a producer. She is a rock star on our team. She will be introducing the guest. And as soon as you hear the introduction, you'll know why she's doing this. So here's Carly.
Hello, Why Not Now listeners. As Amy Jo mentioned, my name is Carly and I'm a producer on the show. I'm so excited to introduce Amy Jo's conversation with astronaut and Marine Corps Colonel Douglas Hurley. Doug was the spacecraft commander on last year's SpaceX Crew Dragon. It was the first crewed spaceflight from American soil in almost 9 years. This episode is extra special to me because Doug's Why Not Now moment actually involves my dad. They met over 25 years ago when they flew together in the Marine Corps, and Doug shares how my dad was actually a big part in why he even applied to be an astronaut in the first place. Doug tells Amy Jo about the week-long interview process and what it takes to become a NASA astronaut. I found this part so interesting to hear some insight into what NASA actually looks for in its astronauts and also what these candidates go through throughout the interview process. Doug talks about that surreal moment when he got the phone call telling him that he would be an astronaut, and how the program changed the trajectory of his life both professionally and personally. Doug's favorite part about being an astronaut is that he met his wife, who is also a NASA astronaut, and they now have a son together. Doug also gets into how he overcame the mental challenge of living in space for extended periods of time. A lot of the ways that he kept his mind healthy in space can surprisingly easily be applied here on Earth, and they're some of the biggest takeaways that I got from this interview. Doug also shares that he's at an inflection point in his career. He recently retired from NASA, and he's planning his next move. I think this will really resonate with anyone making those career jumps and experiencing similar feelings of growth and change. But I think one of the most powerful parts of this interview is when Amy Jo asks Doug to describe some of his favorite moments from his 3 space flights. It's no surprise that Doug can't pick just one, but he describes some of the most impactful moments, and it almost feels like you're right there with him up in space. Without further ado, let's jump right in. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
Colonel Douglas, welcome to the Why Not Now show. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And in the spirit of Why Not Now, let's hop in. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make
and you had to ask yourself, why not now? We will dissect that day, minute, hour, season, and kind of discuss how you went from idea to action.
Well, it's just an honor for me to be here and great to talk to you, Amy Jo. And, I think for me, I've had a long enough career in the military as a pilot, as an astronaut at NASA, that I've had a few of those moments. But I think one that was probably really critical, certainly to get to where I am today as an astronaut who's flown a few times in space, was back in about the 1998, 99 timeframe. I was a test pilot, and a good friend of mine, Matt Shahada, was interested at applying to be a NASA astronaut at the time, and asked if I was interested in flying down and meeting some of the folks down there, kind of as a pre-interview type of thing, nothing formal, just kind of figure out what they do down here at NASA and in Houston, and where folks live and all those kinds of things. And so I said, okay, fine. And so we went down and talked to some folks, and I was impressed. Certainly, never thought, frankly, that was any type of an opportunity that I had any chance of achieving or becoming part of. But after a while, I thought about it after we'd gotten back, and the applications for that particular class, the class of 2000, was due fairly soon thereafter, within the next 6 to 8 months. And so I did have some time to think, and frankly, that's exactly what I asked myself. Why not now? Why not me? Why not at least put your name in the hat and be considered, and then see where it takes you. I certainly never expected any chance of getting even a response. And then lo and behold, I was away for a weekend, and I got back on Monday morning and checked, of course, back then, checked my answering machine. And there was a message from the Johnson Space Center saying, hey, we'd like you to come down for an interview. And I was flabbergasted, absolutely flabbergasted. So that was just the interview part of it. I was amazed to even get a chance to interview. After going through the interview process, and I don't know how much you want to talk about the interview process, but it's back then it's a week-long process where you have a formal interview with a group of astronauts and senior members of NASA, and you're in a room with about 15 of them. And you spend about an hour during the interview. And then the other parts of that week were various medical exams, some of which I had never had to endure before, which were not great, but at least I came out of there with a pretty good idea of my overall health after that week. And then you kind of have a social, so you get to meet people in a social gathering. Which is interesting and maybe a little more or a little less nerve-wracking, I think, than the formal interview. And then, of course, you get to meet some other people that, in a sense, have the same aspirations that you do. Some come from the same walk of life. At that point, I had been a test pilot for about a year. And typically, the way the test pilot thing works in the military is you have a level of experience, and then you apply to go to test pilot school. Then you get selected, and that's like a year-long course of instruction. It's like getting a master's in aerospace engineering, as well as learning flight test techniques. So it's a pretty grueling course. And then after that, you ply your trade as a test pilot on test aircraft. Anyway, so there were other test pilots there in varying points of their career, as well as people from academia and people from all over the United States with that same dream or expectation or hope that they would be picked by NASA. And then you go through that week, which in and of itself was incredibly surprising how much I enjoyed it, and how, even though it was extremely nerve-wracking and from the medical standpoint, pretty invasive, it was just a very rewarding week. And I came away with it. At that point, it was almost like, I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't get picked. But knowing that it was my first time applying, and knowing, and had talked to some folks that had interviewed with me, that had interviewed prior and didn't get that call. Anyway, so you have months at this point to think about it. And I think it was several months. And then skip ahead now to July of 2000. And at that point, the rumors were that they may decide to postpone that class of astronauts. They may decide to delay it. And there were a lot of reasons for that. So I just kind of, resigned myself to thinking, okay, now I've got to figure out what's plan B, because in the military, your listeners may be somewhat familiar with that. Certainly some that have served, but you typically move about every 3 years to a different place. And then you're at a different point in your career. And so there's a different path in store for you at that point. So I was going to have to start planning what my next phase was in my military career, as well as potentially I hadn't quite decided at that point whether I was going to make the military a career. So it was it was kind of almost 3 different paths all converging at the same time. So as I'm sure people realize, I did get that phone call from the chief of the office, the chief of the astronaut office. And he, it's an incredibly surreal moment, I think, for most of us that have gotten that phone call, as I would imagine it is for anybody who tries to do something and knowing that the odds are way, way, way against you. I think the odds of winning a lottery were probably greater, getting hit by lightning were probably greater than my chances of getting a phone call that day. But anyway, I did. It was just kind of one of those things. It's like, hey, would you like to come down to Houston and work for us? And so just an unbelievable day and moment. It really certainly has totally changed the path of my life in many ways, both professionally and of course personally, because I met my wife, and of course we've had a son. And so all that, because of that one day, or probably group of days, where I finally said, why not now? So yeah, incredible. It's just, I still, when I think about it, I still can't believe in some ways that it ever happened, but it certainly did.
Oh my goodness. Well, and I understand you have another kind of why not now phase and season of life that you're going through, and I'd like to bookmark that, but first dial in a little more to this why not now. So what I heard from you was that you said yes to this like almost ride along pre-interview to begin with, right? And I think about how that's one of the biggest points of the story, because what if you hadn't, right? What if you had thought to yourself, this isn't something I've ever dreamt about. I don't think I'll get it. Why would I? And that was such that could have been a pretty big fork in the road. So do you remember just kind of even questioning, I don't know if I'll do this or not? Or were you just like, sure, I'll come along?
Well, it's kind of almost self-serving in some ways. Well, first of all, it was my friend Matt, and we had served together in a squadron before then. So we were pretty close friends to start with anyway. And I knew how important it was for him. And, in the military, you have the opportunity on the weekends to get flight time. And so if you sign up and do the flight planning and all those things, essentially you are given the keys to an airplane for the weekend to go wherever you want. And
Really?
and it's great training, and it's been done my whole career. And it was an opportunity for us, I think, in some ways, to just hang out together. But it was also something that I thought was important for him. I mean, he was very, very serious about it. And he made a lot of good points, because he always does. He's a smart guy. And so I kind of felt like, I wouldn't say obligated, but I wanted to do it for him as much as I wanted to maybe see things for myself. So it was not something that I gave a ton of thought to from how will this affect my future. It was just kind of a case of, hey, this is a great way to spend time with Matt. It's a great way to, see something new, go to a place that I've never been before. I'd never been to Houston before. And so all those things. And of course, as a fighter pilot, as a guy who was currently a test pilot, I'd always been interested in airplanes and space, but never really thought seriously about it till I had that first conversation with him a few weeks before we went on this trip. And it was a case of, hey, look, we're test pilots, we're competitive. We could, this could happen. You could get a chance to fly the space shuttle. And really that's all it took at that point to kind of crystallize it in my mind, along with all those other things that I talked about.
I love that you really kind of double down on that moment of saying yes and kind of talked us through, because it seems like regardless of what was going to happen, it was going to be additive to your life. You get to spend time with your friend. What's the worst thing that can happen? And say yes, like key takeaway, say yes. I just can't get over this vision of you being in a room with 15 people What did they ask you? Or are you even allowed to talk about it? Do you remember? Like, what questions come up at that point that help them determine if they should send you to space or someone else in the next hour that's coming to interview?
It's the perfect question. And I think it probably varies because I've now been on the other side of that. I was the senior pilot member of the board that picked the class of 2013. So that was 2 classes ago of astronauts. And typically we try to keep it as a group of interviewers pretty standard to a degree. In other words, you want to ask the same types of questions to everybody. So it's that perfectly level playing field. But sometimes it really depends on the response of the person being interviewed as to where the discussion can potentially go. And I certainly don't think that's unique to what we do when we interview astronaut candidates by any stretch. And I think the other part of it is you want to see how that person interacts with a large group, because that certainly is a part of our job. Part of our job is promoting NASA, promoting space, promoting STEM, interacting with all walks of life, whether it's school kids, whether it's tech companies, and everything in between. We congressmen, senators, you name it. We interact with them. We socialize with them in some cases, and we're in formal situations with those folks. And so all that is key to finding out whether this is the right person to represent us in those types of situations, as well as, of course, the obvious part, which is, can this person do what they need to do in space, work as part of a team, and function accordingly. So I would say, without giving away the keys to the castle, I would say, what are some of your biggest failures? What are some of the failures you've had in your career, in your life? Where are places that you've been successful, and what did you do to help a team be successful? So some of those I would think are fairly generic. And then others, like I said, just are more off the cuff based on what that person answers to some of the more canned, if you will, questions.
Interesting. Why do you think you got the call that day to welcoming you to this new job and others didn't?
That is the question of questions. And I think I would also answer it with almost another question. It's like, why did I get assigned to 3 different space flights? I think part of it is, what gets you in the door for an interview is your resume and your accomplishments and your reputation within your field. But I think once you get into the room, it's you as a person that I think gets you picked. And what that is probably unique to that group of people that are selecting you. It's also unique to your medical situation, your health situation. Unfortunately, there are many, many people that I certainly think could do this job as well or better than I could have ever done this job that didn't get picked because of various medical reasons. Now, some of those may be more serious than others or less serious than others, but in the end, these are issues that need to be addressed, and that's part of the reason we have such a thorough medical evaluation of our candidates, is because, in the end, you may be in space for 6 months. You can't go to the hospital when you're in space, and you can't easily even get back to Earth while you're in space, certainly unplanned. And so the medical side of it can be very constraining, I think, at times. And I remember, specific to the astronaut selection board I was a member of, we typically nowadays we interview roughly 120 candidates initially, and then we bring back for a second round of interviews somewhere around 40 to 50 candidates. That's when the vast majority of the medical evaluations take place, the much more expensive and invasive ones that maybe some people that are listening have gone through, and maybe some that they haven't. But they have. In the end, it's fairly expensive, and you certainly don't. We as a government agency, just like any other agency or business, you just can't afford to do that to the entire group of 120. So, and in turn, what happens is those 40 or 50 that we bring back are certainly the ones we really like, and there's a good chance that 20, 30, 40% of them, for some reason, don't pass the medical. So that part of it is very, very difficult to to deal with, especially if you consider some of the ones that you think, wow, they would be just spectacular. And that happens every class we select, that happens. So I was just lucky in that regard.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. If you are digging this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. It just takes a moment and it means a ton to us.
You've talked a bit about the medical side and obviously there's the physiological, and then I'm thinking about your mental strength and or stamina. 6 months at a time. I mean, also the fact that you're married to an astronaut and how that dynamic, is as well. But when it comes to that mental side, let's talk about space for a little bit. And how do you keep your mind healthy? And what have you learned that we can even apply here, boots on the ground on the Earth, to stay strong and clear and healthy upstairs?
For me, it's been a process in that regard because I was active duty military. I had several deployments overseas, 6 to 9 month deployments. So very early in my military career, and just like any other military member, you go through that process and you have to manage it. And it very much is in stages, and you have to treat it kind of day by day, not month by month. And you certainly can't sit there at the end of the first week and go, oh my gosh, I got 9 more months of this. And so, you just develop little tricks, I think, to kind of work your way through that. And I think it pays dividends even in spaceflight. Now, much like the military deployments, spaceflight is, I think there are a lot of people that think we just go up to the International Space Station and we look out the window. And it is not that. It is probably the opposite of that. You get very little time to do anything but work. So that can wear on you. And you really just have to kind of do those. For me, what works best is just, okay, I'm going to get through this next task, and then I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to get a drink. I'm going to go look out the window for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to go back to work. And, and then of course, flying with, and you don't get a lot of choices in this matter, but, your crewmates make a huge bit of difference in how you work as a team and how you interact and what the group dynamic is. And certainly, you can't pick these crews, but you have to kind of pick how you react and respond within that group or that team. And I think, for me, I've been pretty lucky in that regard. And it's, once again, I think it goes back to how we select astronauts. It's like the first thing you look for, certainly these days when you're trying to select a new class of astronauts, is how they interact with a group, how they interact with a team. And if they're looking at it from the perspective of, if the team does well, that's what I'm here for, not individual accolades and individual accomplishments. And I think that helps a lot. So a lot of that dynamic is almost fixed before you even get to space. And so, being open-minded and being flexible is a huge part of getting through those longer deployments or those longer times in space. But it certainly is a grind, and you have to have ways, whether it's watching videos at the end of the evening or calling your friends or your family, you have to have that downtime to just shut your brain off. Because I think for me, that's the biggest thing, is just, you got to, at some point in a day, shut your brain off and stop working. And it's difficult because there's so much going on. And then of course, on space station, you can't go anywhere. You can't even go outside for the most part. Now, certainly you can go do a spacewalk, but that's not quite the same as maybe going for a walk around, on the beach, or a walk around the lake, or a walk in the woods. It's not those types of things. And then the other part I will say, just for us in space, we have a tremendous support network on the ground that helps us out, whether it's sports events that you want recorded that you'd like to see, whether it's pictures from your family, whether it's, I'm a huge Manchester City fan. They're a European soccer team. And somebody found out that I was, and they sent a video up from some of the players just congratulating me on my mission. And that 1 minute video, I can't tell you what that did for my well-being or my satisfaction. I mean, it was such a huge surprise and so neat to hear those messages from those players that obviously they've got other things going on in their life. They're famous football players, and they took the time to send a message to me when I was in space. So all those things, I think, combined really, really make it such that the time ends up going by a lot faster than you think it will.
That's incredible. And there's some great tips. It's I think about the fact that you can communicate, to your loved ones is probably huge. But just that note of a 1-minute video and how that impacted you in that situation. But for those listening, I'm a big fan of voice notes and just quick video notes, whether it's for business or it's for personal. And it's amazing how what it can do for both the beneficiary as well as the person that's publishing that or sending that.
It is so worth the time to just send if you're thinking about somebody, it doesn't matter whether they're in space or just across the country and you haven't seen them in a while. I personally feel the same way. And it makes such a difference when somebody does that to me. And so I try to do that. If it's like, hey, I haven't talked to that person in a while, I'll just shoot them a note or just give them a quick phone call. I think it's great. And of course, on a deployment or in space, it's just hugely magnified when somebody does that for you, I think, at least for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine. So do you have a favorite moment from one of your missions that comes to mind, like a top you'll never forget?
I get asked that quite a bit, and it's just so difficult because there are so many to kind of put one at above all the rest. But there are probably a couple that really stand out, probably one per mission, I would say. So, because I just flew last summer and it was a pretty noteworthy mission because it'd been the first time since we'd flown from the United States in almost 9 years. So, and it was a test flight and all those things. And so I think just getting to the launch pad, sitting in the vehicle with Bob, my crewmate, and getting ready to go and just looking at each other and going, we're going to actually do it. It had been 5 long years of development and travel to California, working with SpaceX. And so I think just when the engines lit, I think that was a huge highlight for me, a huge highlight. And then, looking back on my last mission before that, it was the last shuttle flight in history. And we had already undocked from the space station. So we were, when you're near the space station's got a lot of lights and it's metal. So it reflects the sunlight and it's very bright and you can't really see the stars quite as well as you'd like. So when you're in your own orbiting vehicle separate in the shuttle, you can shut all the lights off and look outside, and it's just incredible. And it was the night before we were coming back. And it's just this very fond memory of the 4 of us silently looking out the windows, but, all thinking about, hey, this might be the last time we fly in space. And, this is the last time a shuttle's ever going to be in space and all those things. And that one really resonated with me as well. It was just, so many people had worked so hard and long and over the course of entire careers on the space shuttle. And for that to be the last night that a space shuttle was ever going to be in orbit it was a pretty incredible moment.
Those are pretty epic.
Yeah, it just being in space in general is just completely so different than your normal existence that I think it leaves such an imprint on you that, it's just so hard to pick a moment. It's just the experiences alone, it's almost indescribable at times.
Well, let's talk about the current day and where you are now with, your journey, and talk about why not now. It sounds like you are in this kind of season of deciding. Tell me about that. What is this like?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's nerve-wracking. It's challenging. It's overwhelming. I think there's not enough adjectives, and it's interesting because I knew probably, and I don't think I've really said this publicly, but I probably knew a year before we launched that or had decided, I should say, we had decided as a family, but I certainly decided personally that this was going to be my last space flight, the space flight last summer. And so, while it's awesome to work here at the Johnson Space Center and be an astronaut, it would be very hard to justify for me to stay here as an astronaut if I wasn't intending to fly again, because you're taking up a spot for somebody who who desperately wants to fly maybe their first time or fly again, and among other reasons. And I think the other part of it is my wife, also a NASA astronaut, had retired pretty much literally just as the pandemic started. So in early spring last year. I think it's just, we had been astronauts for 20 years, and it was time to do something else while we were still young enough to want to do, maybe embark on another path or another career or something similar, but maybe in a different way, where you're not flying the spaceships. Maybe you're working in aerospace and you're helping other people fly in space, or you're working for a company or working for yourself, promoting that. And so I think that's, she had made that decision, and, it was for a lot of the same reasons as me. We have a young child, he's 11. And I think, wanting to spend as much time as we can with him as because you only have, roughly 17 or 18 years with them, and then they go off into the world. And so, that's part of that calculus. And the story with him, my wife flew her first time in 2008. We got married in 2009. I flew in 2009. We had our son in 2010. I flew again in 2011, and she flew again in 2013 for 6 months to the ISS. So we had this crazy first part of his life. Now he was relatively young, but so anyway, I think we both are ready for something, a different challenge, and then also something that accommodates us being as present as we can be for him as he starts to, go into middle school and high school. And so, yeah, we're at that point. I've told people this, I've always known what I wanted to do next, probably from the day I started my sophomore year in college. I always knew. And this is really the point where, I'm in my, I guess, early to mid 50s now. And I'm at a point where I have a lot of almost too many options, I think, in some ways. And so it's been really, really difficult kind of narrowing the playing field to some degree to not only find something that I'm passionate about, but also find something that is somewhat family friendly, and then being able to live in a place that, maybe we've always wanted to live. So all those things, have really made it challenging to kind of get to that point. But I think we're very, very close. So I'm excited about that.
Wow. Well, good. What an exciting time too. I'm a big believer in experimenting and dating ideas, seeing if they're safe enough to try, and then double down, if you're a big fan. But that's exciting. What a shift. It'll be interesting to see where you take your experience, your career capital, your intellectual capital next, because that's really, in my opinion, where we get that innovation of mixing things that don't necessarily always mix. And so I'm excited to see what that might be, that next journey.
Me too. And it really is neat to see, my wife Karen and what she's done and started doing and is kind of nurturing as we go along already. And it's exciting. And it's like everything else she's ever done. She's just all in. And, she was all in as an astronaut. She was way all in as a mother and a wife, of course, but just in this career path that she's chosen. And she's a big fan of, always been very artistic, and, some of the collaborations she's doing with some of these, companies and different ideas she's had and different things she wants to try to do. And it's just exciting to see that side of her, which I'd never seen before.
That's great. And probably to have the time and space to exercise that now. So that's what a gift as well. What's one thing that you find yourself learning over and over?
Probably the biggest thing is, taking that extra 5 minutes to just think about something a little bit. It's almost every situation where rather than just, and I put it in some context, rather than just reacting. And I think for me, that's now instinctively, I tend to get it right, probably more than I get it wrong, but not by much. But I just see such a big difference if I just, take 5 minutes, take a breath, think about it, think about what you're going to do or think about what you're going to say, and then go do that. And it just, the results are so much better. Or, something as mundane as you get an email from a coworker about a subject that you're working on, at 11 o'clock at night, my impulse is always to, send a response. But I'll tell you what, if you just sleep on it and think about it a little bit and then send that response the next day, it always ends up being a much better response or reaction or idea than I think if you just immediately respond instinctively. And I relearn that probably a number of times every day. I hate to admit it, but I think that's certainly something that I've always had to really work on. I'm lucky in a sense because I think instinctively I tend to be able to get it right, sort of, but it's just a much better answer or product or reaction if I think about it for a few minutes.
That's really invaluable because we are living at such a hyper speed pace with
it really is. It's so hard to not do that, and just react and just, you see it in every walk of life, whether it's the news, social media. Social media is just incredible in that regard. It's hypersonic speeds. Mm-hmm. And I think just taking that, breathe in, breathe out, think about it for 2 seconds, or 5 minutes probably is a better answer. And then I just feel like you reflect so much better to somebody else if you give them that time.
It's kind of the difference between a reaction and a intentional response too. You can imagine the healthy tension that could be saved or the amount that could be decreased. So if we were to go back, Doug, to that moment where I believe his name was Matt, your buddy, right? Who said, hey, let's go down and I'm going to do this pre-interview and, get some flight hours and flight time. And little did you know what was about to unfold.
Yeah.
If you could go back to yourself in that moment and say something, what would you say?
Just be like, just don't even think about it. Just do it. Because it was part of it was, okay. It was just that lukewarm response and let me check, that kind of thing. And it would have been an emphatic, what do you even, that would have been the time to just instinctively say yes.
Right.
Because it's just, the impact it's had on my, certainly my personal life. And I think that's, if somebody asked me at the end of the day, the best thing about being an astronaut, I would say Karen and Jack. People are probably gonna be like, but it really is the case. That part of it. And then certainly, you get to fly in space a few times and that's awesome. And I'm certainly not downgrading any of that experience, but really, you just think about the dominoes that had the fall, and it all started with that trip to meet Dwayne Ross was his name, because he ran human resources for the astronaut selection. So he was kind of the guy who was in all the different boards, and Matt knew that he was the guy that we should talk to. And I certainly think because I talked to Dwayne, that's why I got that interview, and because I'd gone down there with Matt and Matt was going to talk to him. So I think, and that's what we always kid Dwayne now. He's since retired, but before that, it's like, thanks for doing such a good job because you picked Karen, you're the guy. So, wow. It really is. It's just amazing. One kind of what you would consider almost an innocuous decision, having that kind of a incredible effect on the rest of the next 20 some years and your family life, your child, all that stuff, it all really goes back to that in so many ways. Now, certainly it's not everything, but it's certainly, I certainly doubt that it would have turned out the same way had I not gone down there with Matt.
I love looking back and looking at the dominoes and which one led to another. And Carly from our team is who was able to connect us.
Well, that's her dad, by the way. I don't know if you...
No, I did not realize
that Matt is her dad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just makes it even more. I have goosebumps.
That's what I'm saying. And that's, and I just talked to him fairly recently about this next step, because he had stayed in the Marine Corps, well, not stayed in the Marine Corps longer than me, but he left the Marine Corps right after he had commanded a squadron. And, I asked him about it. I was like, what are you, how does this work? What do we, because he was in the same boat as me. It's like the military, you always knew you were going to change duty stations every 3 years and then, go on to your next duty station. And that just kept on happening. And then to talk to him about, okay, how did it work when you left the Marine Corps? What did you do? Who did you talk to? Because there's really there's no order. There's no book. There's probably a book, but I mean, it's just not quite that simple. There's so many different things you can do. And so it was really great, hearing his side of the story as far as what he had to do. And I think in many ways it's been very similar, but it was comforting talking to somebody who's gone through that. And I think that's kind of the other big lesson learned is in a transition like this in your life is just, reach out to you certainly all have friends that have transitioned to different careers or different, they're wanting to move somewhere else, and, ask them about it and ask them what worked and what didn't work and what they would have done different, and maybe not anything, but, Matt was great at that part of it too. So yeah, I owe him a lot, and he probably doesn't even realize it in so many aspects, but
well, I'm sure, hopefully he will listen. We can have Carly, and it's full circle for sure. This has been a treat. I have a lot of notes here, and thank you for your service. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. And we will be following. Maybe we'll have you back on down the road after you make this next step, and we'll be cheering you on.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and it was so nice to meet you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?